Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast. Today's host is Adam Jones.
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. My name's Adam Jones, and our co-host today, we're replacing Cameron, at least for this episode anyway. So I got Mr. Landry Jones on there as a co-host. Morning, Landry.
Good morning. Yeah, I don't know if I could ever replace Cameron, just kind of filling in for him. So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.
Tough shoes to fill for sure. So we like, I do like to cover these timely topics. We got some great guests on here today. Some of you guys that if you listen to our podcast, you may recognize, and some of them may be new faces. We like to kind of take the opportunity to, everybody kind of has a recency bias. And if we wait to talk about 2026 until 2026, a lot of times all those decisions are already made and we kind of not completely forgot what happened last year, but becomes more of a distant memory. So like to talk about some of these things in a timely way. And so today I'm hoping that we get a chance to cover some nutrient management topics, some especially nitrogen management topics, with some recency bias towards what our weather data was for 2025 and kind of how that affected nitrogen availability within our soil profile. So as far as guests today, I'll have these guys give a quick introduction, and then we'll jump into that topic. So Shannon, recurring guest, but I'll have you give us a quick introduction for today.
Yeah, thanks for the time, Adam. I'm Shannon McClintock. I am the District Sales and Agronomy Manager for Southeast Kansas, Southwest Missouri.
Yep, gotcha. Appreciate your time jumping on here this morning. So, Joe, I'll let you go next.
Thank you, Adam. I'm Joe Zeollner. I'm relatively new to MFA. I'm the Natural Resources Conservation Specialist. I interact with producers, MFA customers, also as a partner within RCS to promote and help spread awareness of regenerative ag practices in regards to cover crops, nutrient management, soil water conservation, a little bit of everything. Out of Columbia, Missouri, and primarily deal with row crop producers north of Missouri River, but can reach out a little bit everywhere.
Yep, gotcha. Well, appreciate you jumping on today, Joe. And then we're going to lean on our university system here for Missouri a little bit too. And we've got Newell Kitchen with us. So Newell, you go ahead and give us an introduction there as well.
Sure. Thank you. My background, have been here on the campus of University of Missouri since 1990. Was with the University of Missouri directly for about 6 years, and then the majority of my career actually a soil scientist within USDA, but on campus, the Cropping Systems Water Quality Research Unit, did a lot of work in precision ag, nutrient management, those type of things. And 2.5 years ago, stepped away from that position because I was kind of wanted to do some things on my own here. So I've got my own little consulting business and was asked to come back and help with the one project that we'll be talking about today, this Missouri Conservation Crop and Livestock project, or a lot of people know it by the acronym CRCL. So been working with it for the last 2.5 years, specifically with the nutrient management component of that.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's a heck of a background, Newell. Appreciate your time and jumping on here and joining us this morning. I'm sure you'll have some awesome perspectives for everybody. I think the first thing that I want to try to do is as we essentially, like I said, target in and I do want to talk about the CRCL grant and kind of opportunities for folks to take advantage of some of these things, to maybe try something that's outside of their zone, right? Maybe they noticed some areas of improvement that they had that for 2025 and want to be able to make some changes. I think some of those programs are a great way to take some of the risk out of doing something different there. But first off, I do want to dive in a little bit to nitrogen in 2025. We had an interesting growing season. I guess I could probably record myself every year on September 12th and say that we probably had an interesting growing season, right? There's going to be nuances to every one of these. This one, very, very front loaded with rainfall for a lot of the state. And then we dried out pretty hard, especially in the north and I think the southeast for the fall. So I'm going to kick it down to Shannon and just kind of first, and I'm going to let you kind of just give me an overall thought on essentially a scorecard, if you will, on how we did for nitrogen management on corn and wheat for 2025.
Yeah, I'm glad you included wheat in there. Sometimes we forget about wheat and the nitrogen management that goes into the wheat.
I know my audience, Shannon.
But you're right in saying, it's another unique year. Um, we usually plant corn down here we start late March, usually March 20th. We get started in Southeast Kansas. This year there was about a 2-day window in March and about a 2-day window in April for planting. And the big reason for that is the rainfall. And you can't talk about a nitrogen program without talking about, rainfall events, especially with how nitrogen moves. So it's been a challenging year. We've seen corn planted from March to late May this year. And as corn is coming out, we started harvest about 3 weeks ago. You can definitely tell the different programs that were used this season, just by looking at crop health as well as looking at some of the yields that are coming into the system. Our wheat program down here, we're fortunate enough that we grow decent wheat, and I think we've kind of maybe gotten that one figured out a little bit. We do split apply a lot of nitrogen. There's not many guys that are putting a lot of nitrogen on early. So from that standpoint, our biggest issue on there again was weight, moisture, more grain quality issues than a nitrogen program issue. But it's definitely been a challenge through all of our crops this season with the amount of rain that we've received. Before we hopped on, I was trying to pull a report, but we've received anywhere from 25 to 30 inches just from planting, middle of April. So it's definitely been a challenge and something we've had to work around this year.
Gotcha. Newell, same kind of question, I guess. What are some observations you've had from 2025? Maybe different parts of the state, and just kind of overarching, give us a scorecard on how you feel like everybody did from a nitrogen aspect this year.
Thanks, Adam. I like what you stated early on in terms of that assessment mid-September. What does it look like? It's, we can't, nitrogen is so tied to what happens weather, and we can talk about total precip, but it's also the distribution of that precip. I mean, we had a lot of, a lot of rain early up until about mid, and then there's a big chunk of the state that just is turned on really dry. Any of that late planted corn, it's coming up way short, I think, by virtue of the fact that it's not a nitrogen issue. It's just a water issue because of the lack of mid to late season. Now there's some parts of the state that did get some timely rains. So it's very, we talk about site specific agriculture, and what drives it for nitrogen is that site specific aspect is the weather. And I guess my observations is there's going to be a wide range of performance outcomes when it comes to nitrogen management by virtue of the wide range of precipitation variability that we see across the state.
Yeah, that's a really good thought process, Newell, because you mentioned the distribution of rain, and I think it's one of those, climatologically, you look up records from this year and you're not going to pick up on those nuances of essentially how detrimental some of those early rains were to our nitrogen program that was out there. Even looking back to last fall, we had a fairly narrow window, from a fall application standpoint, when it comes to ammonia in the north. We stayed warm really, really late in the year, and you guys can talk about kind of the nuances of some of that fall application as that's what we're coming up on. We as a company take pretty hard line on when we start to roll tractors in the fall, and last year that certainly cost us days in the field, because we, by the time the soil finally got cold enough for what we felt like was good to go, good to run, we had about, I feel like, less than 2 weeks to really run hard, and then caught some rains, and that ran us out. So you guys want to give some thoughts on, I think it's a good time to maybe cover some of that fall application that happened and is getting ready to happen again, right? What are some things that we ought to be thinking about from that aspect? Whoever wants to go is fine.
I'll give my 2 cents. We put that, depending on what, doesn't matter when you put that nitrogen out. If it's the middle of winter or in the spring, I feel like we typically lose it at the same time. Those spring rains that we get, that all that precipitation, that was alluded to a while ago, is not about the amount overall, but the distribution of it. And this year we had corn that was planted in March that set wet all April, just set in saturated soils with water standing in it. That's when we lost our nitrogen. That corn that got planted in May, and the nitrogen that was put on in the fall, well, the nitrogen was already gone from those April rains, not necessarily from what happened from May on. So if we're going out in the fall, you mentioned soil temperatures, we got to make sure we're following that. But the biggest thing is making sure we're protecting that with some sort of stabilizer. And there's a lot of different sources we can use nitrogen. There's a lot of different ways to manage each of those sources, and we got to make sure we're managing each one of them correctly for making them as optimum as possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When you mentioned, you hit on a really good point there, Shannon. I think most people have heard about, kind of trying to make sure that we wait till 50 degrees, in the fall, before we make those ammonia applications. That's from a microbial activity standpoint, and the microbes don't completely stop working when we get to 50 degrees, but they certainly slow down enough that we see that conversion to nitrate loss, or the conversion to nitrate pathway slow down to where we feel like that nitrogen's out there, and I guess not super at risk to loss. You hit the nail on the head. Whether we're when we're talking anhydrous ammonia, whether we put it or any nitrogen source, when we put it on in the fall, obviously the rest of them we're putting on in the spring. It is whether you do fall or spring application, your main loss pathways typically come, and certainly did this year, in those big rains that we get in early spring. And it's a good call out. We could have put that gas on February 15th or March 15th. And it really hadn't been there, but a month, but we still lost almost an equal amount of it, because of all our super saturated, conditions. I guess, Newell, what are some of your thoughts on that? I mean, what do you see? And I know you've done a lot of nitrogen work, I know, over the years. What are our main loss? I guess if you kind of just give a real high level of what our main loss pathways and kind of how those apply to this year, that what aspects of those super saturated conditions, and what exacerbates it, right? Temperature, kind of longevity of the soil being just completely inundated. Why don't you kind of share some of your thoughts on that?
Sure. So, Missouri is a unique state. It sits here at the crossroads of a whole bunch of different agricultural commodities, north, south, east, west. It also sits at the crossroads of kind of weather gradients. We're going from on the drier side to a much wetter as you go east, west, and it's warmer to cooler as you go north, south. And so there's within the state, we have, and then you lay over the top of that the soils, the parent material of the soil and how that soil is developed. Is there a lot of clay in the soil? Is it a sandy soil? So you got all these weather factors, and then you got the soil factors, and so having a pretty good working set of agronomic understanding of nitrogen is critical to begin to be able to develop management strategies given that diversity, north, south, east, west, commodities, etc. So there is no generalized good response to kind of saying what's going to work best. I think it behooves all of us to really be fine-tuned when we understand the nitrogen cycle and understand, is it a loss pathway that's leaching? Usually not, unless it's a fairly sandy soil. We've got a lot of heavy clay type soils, clay pan soils here in this state. The loss pathway is most often going to be wet on that clay pan, or with the clay pan holding the water there for days to weeks. And if the nitrogen is sitting there and it's already nitrified, gone to nitrate, it's going to be lost fairly quickly. So I think this conversation is leading to the word that I'm thinking of here, and that is be adaptive. And we've used the word adaptive nitrogen management now for a decade or two, or a decade at least, nationally. How do you become adaptive? And if you're putting all your nitrogen on in the fall and just walking away and say, I've done with my nitrogen, for my corn or whatever, then you're not being adaptive, because you don't know. I was trying to think of a good analogy for this for myself. And there's probably some out there listening to this that are avid archery hunters. Okay. And I've done a little bit when I have hunted. I've enjoyed the most going back to my home state out west, and I love chasing elk around on the mountain and saying I'm hunting, but I'm not doing much shooting. It's just, it's just chasing and enjoying the mountainside. But it's kind of equivalent to you have a buck out there that you see, you got your bow, it's 45 yards out, you've got it, and then you draw your bow and you close your eyes for 10 seconds and then shoot. Okay. Now, no hunter archery person is going to close their eyes for 10 seconds, because you have no idea if that animal's going to move a little bit or whatever. And yet putting all your nitrogen on in the fall is equivalent to closing your eyes for 10 minutes and saying, I hope I got it right. I hope I hit this animal, and you may, if the weather plays out to where that total fall application goes on, and you don't get a lot of loss in the spring, but there's a pretty good chance it's not.
Yep.
And so learning the principles of being adaptive and recognizing some timing and source and stabilizers and all those things got to kind of be in your bag of tricks of knowing what to do to help to match the nitrogen in the soil in an available form for the crop at the time that it needs it. So, and Adam, I don't know if you want me to start talking specifically about the practice.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So actually I spent quite a bit of time early on when the Center for Regenerative Ag and Rob Myers approached me about helping him with the nutrient management part of this circle project. And I did a lot of thinking about my experience, talking to a lot of other agronomists here in the state of Missouri, trying to figure out what is it, what practice, because if you look at what we call best management practices for nitrogen, there's a bunch of them related to source, rate, timing, placement, all those things, and they kind of connect together, So you can list probably 20 to 30 different practices, but if we needed to narrow it down to a single practice, and so we kind of went to what we felt like there was room for improvement within the state. And there's parts of the state that are already, I know that the Boot Hill region of the state, they've been doing a split application with some of that nitrogen going within season for decades. That's the culture down there. And they've been doing it because they recognized early on they had to do it. But there's other parts of the state that it's only been slowly kind of coming along to where nitrogen within the growing season has been more adopted or more readily accepted. And there are some good areas of the state that are seeing that on their corn acres now, but we still felt like there was room for improvement. And so that's the practice. It's splitting the nitrogen to where the timing is that there's a portion, and we put the line in the sand of 25% of the total corn nitrogen fertilizer need is being applied within the growing season. So after the crop is out of the ground. So, if it's, 200 total pounds of nitrogen are going on, then 25% would be 50. So 50 is going to be put on, at least 50 or more can be put on within the growing season. That's the specific practice that is being paid for with this project that I'm helping to direct. And there are a lot of farmers that have signed up to that. They've been doing that already. So do you disqualify yourself because you've been doing it already? No. This is a program to where if you've been doing it and now you want to get paid for doing it, sign up. With that,
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you up. I just had a kind of a question there that popped up, and maybe Shannon or Adam, whoever could, or Newell yourself could answer this. So, I write a few nutrient management plans for producers around the state, and I almost have a harder time trying to get them to reduce their nitrogen. Which, from an input standpoint, a cost standpoint, seems like it would be an easy thing to do, but they obviously know that nitrogen is critical to getting that corn to yield what they want it to yield. They would rather put on more nitrogen than what that corn plant really needs, probably, just to ensure that nitrogen's there and that they don't lose that yield. So my question would be, how do we get growers, one, why maybe haven't they adopted this second pass type system to begin with? And I maybe I'll answer some of my own question. Is part of that is I feel like they don't know what that number is, right? They don't want to short that corn. From a conservation standpoint, I don't want to see guys go and put 75% of that corn's need, after emergence, or from a conservation and a loss that corn plant may not utilize it. So how do we get those growers to be more confident in their decision that when they go out with a 2-pass system and put on nitrogen, that they're putting on what that plant actually needs? They're not either wasting money that maybe they didn't have a nitrogen loss early in the spring from that fall applied ammonia, or that there's a system in place that says, 25% is not going to be enough. Like, we lost a lot of that nitrogen in March and April, and now come June, we need to put maybe 65%. And so, I mean, that obviously still falls into the program, but I'm just thinking from a grower standpoint, how do we build confidence in that grower that if they're going to do a 2-pass system, that they're applying the proper amount? They're either not wasting money, or they know that it's going on and it's going to be used.
That's it. Yeah, good points, Landry. I guess I'm going to jump in there, and you mentioned some things about why maybe folks have been apprehensive to do this in the past. Let's start there. I think there's a couple things, Landry, that technology adoption, I guess, and commercial applications, bars that can run liquid. We've got a lot of ways to side dress that we didn't used to have, back in the day to split these applications. We no longer have to pull an anhydrous toolbar through there and burn a bunch of root tips off of corn to make those late season applications. So I think that's a big one. That has changed, I guess, from some of those previous attitudes towards split applications. I think another thing that has changed is economics. I think when this practice was first around, I guess I'm going to call myself young enough to just say that back in those days, nitrogen was cheap, right? I'm sure it wasn't in relativity like in some of those years, but gosh darn it, looking at it right now, nitrogen was cheap back in those days, right? And so I think there was a lot of thought process that came with, well, I'll just bump up my initial rate a little bit. That's essentially crop insurance. That's going to, that's my form of crop insurance, right? And I'm just going to bump my rate and then skip that. I don't need to worry about that second application. It's never going to pay, right? And I think when you look now, that, like I said, when you look at the equipment changes, when you look at the products and the stabilizers that we have, and when you look at the nitrogen cost, especially in ratio to the cost of a bushel of corn, if we're going to talk about corn nitrogen, those three things have completely changed the conversation on split applications. So I'm gonna let the other get two. They're probably more well versed enough to cover some of the rate discussion that you had there. But as far as kind of historical nuances as to why people are somewhat slow to adopt, I think that covers it.
Yeah. So the first two things that came to my mind was, well, you've got logistics and you've got the rate. You've got to determine those two things to make that application. As Adam mentioned, we've got the logistics figured out. It's still a time sensitive window because we are still restricted by height. Maybe with some new genetic technologies in corn that's coming in the next few years, maybe that changes a little bit. But right now we are limited about when we can get across that field. We can always go across with airplanes if we need to, but then what does rates look like? So the next thing you look at is rates. That is, we kind of alluded to it already. That's a moving target. We could go into it in the fall with the plan, but depending on weather pattern, that number can move quite a bit in just a few short months. And it could change by field. It may not necessarily be a whole farm change. So that's why some of these newer technologies are coming out, some different modeling that's coming out, like the Crop-Trak N model, using those tools that we have to help hit that moving target. Because it's a year by year deal. There's no 2 years that are the same. There's no two fields that are the same. We may have different yield goals in each field. We may have different soil types in each field. We've seen now that we might get rain in 1 mile, and the next mile there is no rain. So it's really narrowing it down to the acre and making those recommendations. And that's where some of the tools that we have in the toolbox come into play to help set those rates.
Well, there's another aspect to this too, and when we talk about rates, and I think Newell did a good job with his analogy of closing your eyes. There's a reason there's more than one R, right? It's be weird if it was 1R nutrient management, but because if all we had to do was hit the right rate, it'd be a fairly simple task, right? You know, MU's got a calculation for it. If you're close enough to one of the other states and you want to, you know, take a look at their models, I think that's a good mental exercise at least to do, and see what they recommend across our boundaries. But it's a number, right? I can do some inputs into some sort of calculator and come back with a number. But another thing when we think about in-season applications and splits like this is, and I think this again brings a little hesitation, or I guess in some growers' opinions, a little more risk to this transaction of putting a side dress application out there. We've also got to get that nitrogen into the plant, so it's not just like a simple rate discussion, right? If we're throwing nitrogen on top of the ground, if we're putting liquid at the base of the stalk, however we're doing it. We've got to make sure that we have precip in order to. Now, this is Missouri, not Western Kansas, so it's not typically an issue for us. But you can run into weather scenarios where that pathway is more difficult, right? And then if you're making surface applications, which most of the time we are in those scenarios, again, you've got lost pathways there. So what are your inhibitors? How are we using them? How are they being put into that product that's going out there to make sure we don't lose it before we get a rainfall that allows that product to get into the plant, the nitrogen to get into the plant.
I'd like to suggest kind of a framework of kind of thinking about what we're talking about now. And what we're talking about is the decision process, the decision the farmer makes relative to nitrogen. And I kind of look at it this way. There's the 4R part of this, and the source rate, timing, placement, and all the connectedness of those different things. And that's, in my world, that would be kind of, I think that's the science-based. The research says this supports, and this helps us to understand the principles of what's the best way to do it. Okay, so it's a science box over here. And then we have what you also, Shannon, you and Adam talked about in terms of the equipment or the logistics. So it's the, can I do it? Do I have the equipment? Is the delivery of the product? I don't want to be held up. When it's time to go, I got to be able to go. And that equipment needs to be there in support of that decision, that science-based decision. And the third one I'm thinking about, and it goes to, how do you get farmers to move? Sometimes my conversations with different farmers, a lot of times a big part of their decision is based upon their own experience. Okay. And they're, for the most part, they may not have taken a bunch of agronomy classes or soil classes, but most of the time they're pretty dang good observationists. And they kind of go out there and they see year after year after year. And nitrogen is such an easy one to see when you've come up short, maybe if you're long, it's not so easy to see that, but you're going to see it if it comes up short. So I think farmers use their experience mixed with the science, mixed with the logistics. Then there's their experience. So I'd like to think this project is somewhat of a try it out. We're going to help cover some costs, $20 an acre for you to try this out. And you can do up to 500 acres and get $10,000 for doing this on your farm. And if you do that and you get an experience that's positive, and you kind of say, well, I'm going to do it again. And after 2 or 3 years, if the feedback for them and their own experiences, this is working, I think that's when they ask themselves the question, can I back off on my rate? Because my timing is so much better. I'm getting that nitrogen when the nitrogen use efficiency to the crop is much higher. Maybe I can back off, 10% or 15%. It may not even be a lot. So I think that's a natural, intuitive kind of way for them to we're not asking them necessarily to change rate with this practice. I think if the practice is good, it's going to give them the experience for them to automatically do that over years.
It's a great thoughts, Newell. It really is. Like I said, I know growers use nitrogen rates a lot of times as risk mitigation, probably too often. And we definitely all ought to be toying with that rate a little bit, in one direction or another, as far as just making sure we're being optimal, right? Even if that is just personal observations. That's really, really good stuff. You guys mentioned the program. You mentioned a little bit, and that is a timely topic. So let's cover that real quick. So if somebody is interested in participating, and I'll kick this to Joe, Landry, Newell, whichever one of you guys wants to cover it. If somebody wants to participate in the program for this year, who do they need to get a hold of? What's kind of the sign up pathway, deadlines, all that kind of good stuff?
You want me to speak to that first, and then you guys fill in the gaps from your perspective? Okay.
Yeah.
So, if you go to the Center for Regenerative Ag site at University of Missouri, you're at the top. There is a menu that has the third one on the line is projects. And if you go then to projects, the very top project is the Missouri CRCL project, which is the one we're referring to here. So within that, there's about 8 different programs. The only program that currently is open for application is the nutrient management and 4R approach. Okay. The others are closed for the year. So you'll see there's a little banner right on the tile that shows the fertilizer applicator there, the nutrient management, that it's open until September 30th. So this podcast is really quite timely because you got about 2 weeks to get in there and get your application in.
Great. No, I appreciate that. That's a fairly easy website to find. That's just cra.missouri.edu. And if you just Google Center for Regenerative Ag, I just tried it. Missouri is the top one that comes up. So we ought to be proud of that in the old Google machine. Are there any geographic limitations to that, guys? Is that somewhere somebody from any part of the state can apply for that? You must be muted, Landry. I don't know if you are.
Yeah, sorry. The way I understand it, Newell, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is no restriction on who can apply. There is some portions of the state, and I believe it's in the southeast part of the state, that maybe is going to get some preference on awarding producers this program. But yeah, I think it's open to everybody, and the way I understand it, and again, Newell, correct me if I'm wrong, is that in the years past that this program has been available, it hasn't been utilized to its fullest extent, and so I think there's some funds there to not only potentially fund that southeast part of the state, but obviously some other parts. It would be nice, I'd like everybody that applies to get into it, but if we get to that point where we run out of money, then we know we've done a good job, and there's a lot of acres that are getting some good management done on them. So, anyways, yeah, I think that's it. Newell, you can add whatever you want to there, or Joe.
Yeah, Newell, I do have a question that I've run across a couple times. We share those programs amongst our customer base, and answer quick field questions from time to time. And I've had a couple guys ask me, they farm as a family. It's like two brothers and their son or something, they're all registered under their own FSA number. Can they individually apply for the program as long as they're, claiming acres under their own FSA numbers, that they're actually farming themselves? There's no limitation just because they help each other out. Is there?
Good question. We do have a lot of those that they're set up as individual entities, LLCs. Sometimes there's trusts and so forth. But if that is identified and registered with FSA that way, and those acres with that, that's a unique entity, and that can be a unique application for the program. Does that answer your question?
Yep, that covers it. Thank you.
I've got a question on this. So, to the rate, does the rate have to be an MU recommendation, or can that rate come from someone like an MFA?
It can come from wherever. The practice, and now let me speak to the practice, and then also conditions that also have to be met. Okay, so the practice is, I mentioned this before, 25% of the total corn nitrogen fertilizer, and we're discounting biologicals, manure. We're not putting that into it because that's pretty tough to quantify what you're going to get anyway. So this is the nitrogen fertilizer portion. That 25% of that total is within the growing season, and it isn't based on any specific recommendation for rate. The other conditions are that you'll see that it says nutrient management and 4R approach. So here within the state of Missouri, working through the Missouri Fertilizer Control Board over the last 3 years, and in part because of this project, we've really kind of ramped up a version of 4R certification. Each state has gone about it in different ways. In some states, it's very regulatory in nature, that certification. Here in Missouri, we have not taken that approach, where it's a little bit more, I just kind of go through some educational steps, and you work with people who understand the principles of 4R. And so there are, I think, about 170, 170 retail stores now that have gone through that certification. And there's about another, I'd say 15 to 20 CCAs, standalone independent CCAs, that have gone through the certification. So we're up in about 180-ish. And if you go to the Missouri Fertilizer Control Board's website, but it's linked through the application process, because the application says you're going to work with one of these individuals or retail stores that have gone through this certification. Okay, so that's one of the requirements. Second requirement, that you're using soil testing at least once every 4 years to help in the nutrient management decisions on these fields that you've applied for. And most farmers are doing that. That's usually not a major lift. And then there's also a little educational component. There's some videos that we've produced specific to nitrogen management and this practice. It's about 30 minutes. I think there's 4 or 5, 6 maybe total videos. And we ask those who apply to watch those videos, kind of as an educational, no meetings you have to go to, just watch those videos. There's a few other little things, but those are the big things. Several have asked, well, what about some other crop? What about wheat? What about sorghum? What about cotton? Those are nitrogen crops too. Well, this program, the way it's set up, is for corn. And someone asked, what about popcorn? Well, last time I checked, popcorn was corn. And so you could apply this to popcorn acres if you wanted, but it has to be corn the way it's written up. It doesn't include those other commodities. Perhaps in the future, if this thing would continue to go, we would expand it to some others. But right now we're keeping it to corn acres. And I think that's a fairly good quick description. And there's more details that I think you need to read through when you get in there. It's a very simple process. I'll just say it's been it's a bit of challenging year, because not from my standpoint, not the weather, but challenging from a program implementation standpoint, being as this is USDA dollars, and USDA has gone through a curve, like a lot of federal agencies, has gone through all kinds of turmoil and reset and reevaluation. This is actually only, I don't know how many of these original projects are still going, but the one here in Missouri is one of the ones that survived the process of getting, staying active. They're actually now called Advancing Markets for Producers projects. It was used to be called Climate Smart, and it's been all rebranded, I guess. It's Advancing Markets for Producers. That's the name of it. And I think it speaks well of the program they got going here in Missouri and the leadership that is behind it, that it was demonstrated that it was doing what it was intended to do, working directly with farmers. And so it's still, but that whole process the last 8-9 months, as you all know, it's been kind of like what's happening. And so some of the programmatic parts of this have been slowed down a little bit, but we're getting our feet back under us. And I think it's important for farmers to know that this is a legit project.
Absolutely. And the most important part of all those projects, regardless of anything, is getting those dollars to guys that are doing the right practices on the ground, right? That's from an MFA standpoint, that's what we want to see. We want to see those dollars, if they get allocated through USDA, make it to the ground, get to the producers that we know they're out there doing the right thing. Just a heads up, every single MFA location in our system is on there as an approved retailer. So we've got a big portion of that 100 and some list are our MFA locations. But I know we do want to stop for time here at some point, but I'm going to let Shannon real quick. I know we mentioned some of the model things. You kind of had a good question there about rate and some of those determinations. And I think there's varying degrees of different models out there from a nitrogen standpoint, but I think there's something to be learned from somebody taking a look at them when it comes to some of the loss pathways and kind of quantifying some of that. So I'm going to just give you a couple minutes, Shannon, to cover that real quick, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, thanks for that, Adam. Yeah, so we can't, two of our core values at MFA is customer partnering and stewardship. And customer partnering, working with the extension office, working through these programs, getting this money into our customers' hands. That's what we want to do. And then stewardship. Stewardship is key. And we talk about the 4 R's a lot today. That's not just on nitrogen, but all of our nutrients. And the reason why I asked about the different rates and where that comes from, MFA, we are bought in on this system, and we promote this all the time, particularly through our Nutri-Trak program. So our Nutri-Trak program is our 2.5 acre grid sampling program. Its main focus starts with pH, and then it follows our macros. And as we correct those, we go into our micronutrients. Nitrogen's a big key of that. Soil sampling for nitrogen can be a little challenging. Typically, when we're pulling our cores for P and K, we're pulling those in the fall, maybe early spring. I take the nitrogen number and I don't look at it unless we're maybe doing something that fall that may pertain to nitrogen. We talked about it a lot today about how that's a moving target, and we'd have no idea what that number is going to look like come April or May. So we've got a model that we use. We've tested this model several years now. I used to say 5 years, but I think it's been 7 or 8 now since we've been using the Nutri-Trak N model. But what it does is we're able to take all that sampling data and put it into the model, as well as incorporate, any type of planting data that we've got. So relative maturities, yield goals, planting rates, organic matters, anything that would have a negative or positive impact on nitrogen. We can do that if we're variable rate planting or variable rate yield goals. We can incorporate that as well. So we can incorporate all of our variable rate data. We'll variable rate in the DAP. We can put that in there, but then we're tying that into the weather portion of it. And so it's live up until the point of that day. And then there's a prediction based on a 30-year average of what could potentially happen from that day if you were to pull the trigger to what it looks like. So not always right. I mean, it's a model at the end of the day, but it kind of gives you kind of a guideline of what to be looking for. kind of takes some of those 1,000 variables that we do know exist out. We can also incorporate soil sampling in season if we needed to maybe correct it, but we're, you know, depending on growth stage, depending on the time of year, depending on what the averages are for that time of year, kind of get a little bit better handle on what those rates should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it counts for the differences in soil types and all those kind of things they're a little more nuanced across a piece of ground. And like I said, I think there's a lot to be learned from taking a look at it, especially lost pathways and those things. Guys, before we wrap this up, anything else anybody wants to share from an aspect of I think these guys did a good job kind of going through processes of getting applied for the grant, going through retailer, all those kind of things. It's a good timely topic to get on there and get this done before the end of the month. But what did we forget? Anything else anybody's got before we wrap up for today?
Let me just add that, for those producers who've applied the first 2 years of this, early on, there was some limits or some, total limits that they could kind of, total amount from each of the different programs. And some of those have been changed to where they can apply, even if they receive funding for this at the limit, at the cap for the first 2 years, they can still apply this year. There is kind of open doors wide on this thing. So hopefully there will be returning customers that would want to consider getting back in again for the third year of the project.
Absolutely. Good deal. Well, it's going to be critically important moving forward, looking at balance sheets for this year and kind of where we're at from a profitability standpoint to get those nitrogen rates correct, get those applications correct, essentially maximize the crop that we can get off and the economics to do so. So I think a very timely topic from an ag scenario there, and a great topic from a aspect of getting folks in the program. So Newell, appreciate your time this morning jumping on here. Landry, Shannon, Joe, appreciate everybody's time facilitating this discussion, and we'll try to get those links posted along with this podcast, and we'll see everybody next episode. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Made for Agriculture, brought to you by MFA, your whole farm solution.